Today we're visiting with Carol Hyler, Patzer, a longtime member here at Hope United Methodist Church. And Carol has been a member here since November 16th, 1980, a little over 42 years. And Carol, I wanted to thank you for sitting for this interview and telling us about your memories of hope. Tell me how you first heard about this Christian community we call Hope.
That's a fun story because my family and I had moved to Breckenridge, and I was going through a difficult time. I was getting a divorce, and Father Dyer Church was right there. And I went over and I talked with Al Brown and Laura, and they were so kind and so helpful. And I just thought, this is the kind of church I want. So we became friends. And then I heard he was being transferred down to Hope Church. And I thought, oh dear. But in the meantime, years later, I had met Walt Hyler.
Yes.
And we got married, and Al Brown married us in Georgetown in the little courtyard behind the hotel.
When was that?
1980.
1980?
Mm-hmm. And so then we bought a house in Aurora in a section called the Dam West, and Al Brown and Laura lived across the fence in the Shores.
Oh, really?
Literally. So sometimes we hop the fence and go visit. So they were very good friends of ours. And so I remember one particular time, there was a Christmas Eve blizzard. I don't know what the year was. And we were over there, and Al was struggling to whether or not to close the church, because you just don't do that on Christmas Eve. So he listened to reports, and he called other churches, and he didn't know quite what to do. And then he heard all these churches were canceling, so he said, we'll have to cancel Hope Church Christmas Eve service. Let's have a drink. Typical Al.
That may have been 1982 when we had a terrific blizzard on Christmas Eve. That's true.
It probably was.
So like a ton of snow.
That was so funny.
Well, Al was the pastor here in 1980.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we joined this church in 1980. And he used to give spaghetti dinners at his home with Laura when the new members would come in. Mm-hmm. And it was so nice to do that, but he had to stop because it just got too big. And that was a very nice thing for him to do, yes. I thought.
What are some of the things you remember about Al?
Oh, he was so gentle and teddy bearish. That's a good description. A really nice hometown guy who gave good sermons, and you could always take something home from it. And Laura, his wife, was super at work in the church. She started something called the Care Team. Do you know about that?
Yes.
And she trained a bunch of us on how to be caregivers. And that went on for a long, long time.
If I'm not mistaken, Laura was also trained as a counselor. Mm-hmm. Yes, she was good at listening to people and
she was wonderful.
Helping guide people. Mm-hmm. She helped me considerably at the time I was getting divorced. Mm-hmm. She had a divorce adjustment group that she led, and she was quite instrumental in kind of keeping me on the right track and helping me with some things I was struggling with.
Yeah, people like that are so wonderful, so helpful. So then Al Brown had a helper guy whose name was Victor Scholl.
Yes.
And we were moving into our house in Aurora after we'd been here 2 times. And he knocked on the door, and he and his wife came in to visit us, and packing boxes all over the place. And I said, well, come on in here and sit in the living room. And we had a nice chat. And he said, I want to welcome you to Hope Church. And I thought, wow, this is really something. I've never been welcomed to a church before. But he was so kind, a good man.
Yes. And do you remember his wife, Ruth?
Not as much. He did all the talking,
Yes.
as I remember.
He was instrumental in visiting a lot of people who attended
yeah.
Hope, and then
Yeah.
his follow-up, I think, attracted them to come here.
Absolutely, because I had never seen anything like that before.
Yep.
It was great.
And you and Walt got active in the church?
We sure did. Yeah. Walt had a beautiful singing voice, and so we both joined the choir, and we did all different kinds of activities. He was on SPR, and I was once, and he was on a mission and outreach council for a while. It's just too many to think about, really.
Yes. Well, in those days, in 1980, we worshiped in what we call the Schult Fellowship Hall.
Yeah.
Tell us what
Yeah.
that was like.
Well, it was work. Meaning you had to set up the chairs, and everybody had to do it. And Al Brown just stood right up there and preached his homey sermons. And there was a choir at that time up in the corner, the right corner. There were risers.
Yes.
And Barb Blair was the choir director. And we just stayed in that choir loft. It was great.
That Fellowship Hall / Sanctuary was an all-purpose building.
Oh
We used it for everything,
my.
and you're right. We had to set up and then oftentimes disassemble the place for a classroom or something else
Yeah.
that the youth might be doing to use that same building.
Yeah.
And what do you remember about those early days with the choir and Barb Blair?
Barb Blair was super. She knew what she was doing and she gave good direction. And some of the people who were in the choir are still there. Like Cindy Wyant and Mary Witt and Julie Durst and I used to sit together and we'd chit chat in the row and she'd say, shh. But she was good music.
Were you talking like schoolgirls during your choir practices?
Yeah, we were all young, Charlie. Jeepers, that was a long time ago.
It was a while ago,
Yeah.
that's true. Well, this church is known for its music programs, and you've been involved in some of those highlights that you remember?
Yes, the choir directors have all been good in their own way. We learned something from every one of them. And at one point, I was on the music committee, and we had to hire an accompanist. And so we interviewed a bunch, and then Cheryl came along, and we heard Cheryl play. And we thought, oh, this is the one. And we all liked her so much, we thought we should run out to the parking lot and say you're hired. But oh, she's perfect.
She's a wonderful talent.
Oh, she can play anything. She makes everything sound good.
Well, and you remember when we moved into the big sanctuary in 1984, and we had an organ at that time, and then later bought a new and improved organ that really added a lot to the music program.
Oh, my, yes. Yeah. Cheryl loves that new organ. She's wonderful.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
Any other peculiarities that you remember about just worshiping in the one room?
No. Al knew people, and he'd call on them or ask them or something. And for instance, Barb Blair's son, Mark, I think, played the trombone, and Jim was in the choir, the dad, and so Al said, I don't know who was more proud, the dad or the son. It's just that kind of an easygoing thing. He was really great.
It's been a wonderful connection, I think, for those involved in the music program.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You're right that some of our members have been here for many years.
Yeah.
I like your comment about you learned something from each one of the different directors.
Yeah, different ways of conducting. Paul Smith was wonderful in his way, very clear direction, and each one of them good.
Yeah. Well, were you disappointed when Al Brown left this church?
Oh, yeah.
I think we all were,
Yeah.
identified with him.
We got used to his comfortable ways. And Laura was a good friend of mine.
Well, his personality, Al Brown's personality, was much different from the next pastor, Dr. Vickery. You remember Richard Vickery?
Yeah, it was like night and day, really. Al was just comfortable, and Dick Vickery was organized, which is nothing wrong with that, and had very structured sermons,
Yes.
and we always learned something. But he wasn't a cozy kind of a guy. But he did a good job.
I agree. And following him, Sam Day. Do you remember Sam Day?
Yes, I do remember. He was a good preacher, and we all could learn from him, and he was very personable, and he always ended his sermon with the good news, and I like that part.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Well, you and Walt in 2012 were recognized as outstanding volunteers at this church and were named recipients of the Sam Day Award in that regard. Tell me a bit about your involvement and the things that you and Walt did.
Well, mostly the arts committee and the worship committee and anything to do with the arts, because Walt was a marvelous potter. And when we got the award, we were in the fellowship hall, and they were listing all the attributes of the person who was getting the Sam Day Award. And they mentioned, oh, this couple has been in the choir for years, and they've been active in the church for years. And I was busy sitting there thinking, who's been in the choir as long as we have? Took me totally by surprise.
You didn't recognize the description of yourself.
And I was so flabbergasted I couldn't even think of anything to say except thank you. And then we had a picture taken, and Walt put his thumb over my name while we took the picture.
I may have.
Wait a minute here. But that was quite a surprise and quite an honor. People on that plaque are really special.
Well, it's the church's way of recognizing your service and all the help you've been to this service, this community for many, many years.
Yeah.
After Sam Day, we had Margaret Hankins came as a minister, and she was the first female minister. What did you think about that?
I thought it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I liked the way she held her district committee meetings when she came here. She was the district superintendent, I think you call it. And she was so clever and organized and made it fun. And when she was appointed, I thought, oh, this is great. And I learned a lot from her, taught good classes, and was always present. When my son was very, very sick, he was in St. Anthony's Hospital, and he had an illness that nobody knew what it was. He was in his 30s or 40s, and she would come over just about every day to see how she could sit with me and help me. And one day he was going to be treated for spinal meningitis, and I just cried on her shoulder, and she said, well, it'll be good to have one more thing ruled out, and then you'll begin to know what you're dealing with. Oh, she was so special. And my son got better. They found out he had a very strange, forgotten disease from World War I.
My goodness.
Yeah, that nobody knew about anymore. It was a bacteria infection.
I agree that Margaret not only was a very elegant person, but she was also very intelligent. But she had a friendly, welcoming manner about her.
Always, yeah. And her partner was John Lee.
Yes.
He was assigned with her. And we knew John from going visiting Mountain View Church. And I really liked John. And the fun thing is, Walt and John shared the same birthday, May 14th. Yeah. So we did have a lot of fun things doing that, celebrating together. And John was wonderful. He would spend time with a person and really listen. I liked him so much, and his sermons were equally as good as Margaret's, just different.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I was a floral designer, and I had a job at Michael's way over on Colorado Boulevard. And when John Lee was working as a counselor, his office was very close to that. So I'd say, "Hey, John, I'll buy you lunch at Subway if you'll come and help me figure out this dream I had." He always did.
And he would do it.
Yeah. Yeah. We all had a half an hour lunch, and and he did teach dream classes.
Well, I remember the staff parish committee had
Mhm.
a difficult time sort of reconciling having co-pastors
Oh,
instead
really?
of a senior pastor and associate pastor. But Margaret and John Lee made that work, in my opinion,
Oh, I thought it was
seamlessly.
great. I thought that was such a smart idea
Yes,
to be equal. Wow, that was good.
I think sometimes our ego gets in the way and we want to be the big dog or something, but John and Margaret were neither
They
that way.
wouldn't do that.
They were very cooperative
Yeah,
and worked well together.
yeah,
Yeah.
they did.
And then
Mhm.
Steve Miller came after John Lee and was a co-pastor with Margaret. Do you remember Steve?
Yes, because, well, there are lots of reasons I remember Steve Miller, but the first Sunday he was in here, it was when we were having an awful Miller moth infestation. And it was his first Sunday, and he said, "I guess it's not a good idea to have a name Miller right now."
I didn't remember
Do you remember
that.
that? I just thought that was just so funny. But he was a good preacher and very charismatic and presented things differently. And I always listened. And Lissa, his wife, was instrumental in getting, what do you call those little plays,
Yes.
people together from the church who would put on a little play during the service where they would get the point across in a play. And I thought that was a great idea.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Steve was quite a musician in his own right.
Mhm.
And he and Alyssa added a lot
Yeah.
of what I would call new and contemporary
Mhm.
ways of worship. And
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
dramas
that's
and
true.
small plays was one of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. He was good.
After Steve Miller and Margaret were no longer here, Dale Beck came for a year. Do you remember Dale Beck?
I do. I was wishing he could stay.
Me too.
Really?
Yes.
This is the guy we need. He was good and he had all these wonderful things put together in one person, but he couldn't because he was just an interim.
Yep.
And I thought he was great.
I did too. And
Mhm.
and maybe he served that purpose for us to heal after Margaret and Steve were gone. And
Yeah.
he had a very good demeanor and
Mhm.
very
Mhm.
heartwarming person.
Yes.
I liked him.
I don't know where he is now. I wish I knew.
I think he lives up in Estes
Estes?
Park,
Yeah.
but
Maybe
he's retired from the ministry
oh,
now,
has
but
he? Okay.
he's still active some in the conference.
Mm.
I ran into him a couple of years ago
Did you?
at the annual conference, and it was just like sitting down with an old friend. And
Oh,
I had only had that 1 year's exposure to him, but
Yeah.
he was very good with the youth. He identified with the kids, and he had a connection with the kids that I really admired. And
didn't
Dale
know
and
that.
Dale Beck.
I didn't know that.
We've had some other pastors since that time. After Dale was here, Steve Warren was the pastor.
Mhm.
Remember Steve?
I do. He was very kind, I thought. And he gave good sermons. And interestingly enough, his parents would come to church. And I thought, how great that is. You should be parents and see your son up there working like that.
Yes.
But I liked him. I liked him a lot.
It was unusual in that he had gone to Cherry Creek High School as a youth,
Oh, I didn't
and
know
then
that.
to come back and have the pastorship 2 blocks away from his high school.
I didn't know
I thought that was very unusual about
Yeah.
his life's path.
Wow.
Yeah.
A new church on the corner.
And following Steve, Don Bird
Mhm.
was here. Remember Don?
Yes, he was very good. I remember him as being a gentle person, and he spoke very well. And he was here quite a long time, I think.
I think 5 or 6 years, I think
Yeah.
you're right.
Yeah, and he has a very nice family, and he is very considerate. Well, I liked him.
Well, and your connection with Father Dwyer Church up in Breckenridge also turned out to bring us another pastor, Claire McNulty Drews,
Yeah.
came here from Breckenridge. You remember Claire?
Yes, I do, because I called friends of mine up in Breckenridge and I said, "What do you think of Claire?" And my friend said, "Oh, we're so sorry to lose her. You're gonna love her, but I wish she wasn't going." And she was right down to earth and said things we could remember.
Yes.
I'm so sorry she got sick,
Me too.
because she would have been good to stay.
Yes. And our current pastor, Lynn Cheek, do you know Lynn very well?
Not very well, but I'd like to.
Oh.
She's full of life and gives good sermons and wants to have us understand how much she loves her work.
Yes.
And her husband is very nice too.
Yeah.
And Brian, his name is Brian.
Yes.
And in fact, we invited them over for lunch one day, just because we wanted to get to know them better.
Yeah.
So,
I think she was at a decided disadvantage because the first year she was here, the COVID pandemic came and nobody showed up at church. Or if we did, it was very different. You know, a few of us would meet on the lawn, or we wouldn't meet inside for fear of passing the disease from one to the other.
We talked about that, and she said it was so difficult to be appointed a new pastor and COVID hits, and how do you pastor when you don't know anybody?
Yes.
But she did the best she could.
I think so too.
By having us send pictures of ourselves in there. But that was tough hand to be dealt, I think. But she's doing fine.
Well, let me mention some of the female associate pastors or youth pastors and sometimes connectional pastors who were here. Do you remember Lois Schugert?
No.
Or Sue Wilcox?
Yeah, Sue Wilcox. I had some counseling sessions with her because I was kind of muddling around, and I met her right here in the church for some counseling. She's a good counselor.
Marilyn Lesser?
Remember Marilyn? Yeah, she was quite a force, I think.
I agree.
In a good way.
Yeah.
And Walt made her a beautiful sculpture of clay when she retired. It was quite a big sculpture of what I call a Madonna.
Yes.
It was just beautiful. And that was her retirement present. And then after she died, her husband, Al, didn't have room for it in his new apartment.
Oh, yeah.
And so he gave it back to me because I didn't have one of those.
Well, that's a nice gift.
Beautiful, yeah. That was very nice of Al to do that.
Yeah. What about Stephanie Price? Do you remember her?
Sure. She was so young. Oh, she just looked like a high school kid. But boy, she had a lot to say.
She had a lot of energy.
Oh, she did. And she was wonderful when Walt was really sick. She came over to the house and would sit with him, and they'd talk, and he would tell her all I don't know what all he told her, but they had a good relationship. In fact, she did his funeral. And she did such a good job. I remember she was saying, when I was talking to Walt and he was struggling, and I was struggling, and I thought, oh, what a great way to put it. Very empathetic gal. Yeah, she was good.
And I think we all had that and that she was very young because she looked very young, and she was. And she had a high-pitched voice, which sounded a little bit like a kid. But when you sat down and talked to her, you realized there was a lot of depth to
Yeah.
that lady.
Always.
And she was
always.
wonderful with people. She had
Yeah.
a real nice way
Yeah.
with people.
I like it when she'd look right at you, as if she really was interested in what you were going to say.
Yeah.
That was good.
Well, what year did you lose Walt?
Walt died in 2012, in December or late November. Yeah, so I was single for quite a while, but he left a great legacy of his knowledge of the scriptures and the Bible, or maybe not so much the Bible, but all the things around the Bible. He read everything he could get his hands on about theology. He just read everything. And so his eyesight started to fail, and that was horrible because he had macular degeneration and he could not read anymore. And so I tried to figure out ways to get him the books he liked to listen to. And I'd go to the library for the blind, and they did not have anything so uppity up as he was. And so Lois Goins came over to our home and helped him with the computer, which of course he'd never seen before. He didn't do computers, and helped him get a book like the Gospel of John, for instance, onto his computer so that it would play the words in big so he could read it as it was going down. Oh, she spent hours with him getting those books on. Maybe I think I have about 5 of them that she did for him.
We lost Lois Goings also. She was a wonderful member of this church for many years.
Yeah.
I didn't know that connection with her and Walt.
Yeah. She'd come over and she'd always have lunch.
Yeah,
so
that's a common theme here. You and Al and Laura would have lunch together, and you and John Lee would have lunch together.
You gotta eat, you know. When they say Methodists are always eating. Oh, dear.
Well, and then later you were married at this church to Larry Patzer. Tell us how that came about.
Larry and his wife, Pat, had joined this church way back in 1981 or 2. And so we met them here, which was kind of fun, and we became friends. But then they had to move to Colorado Springs for a job. But we still kept in good touch, and we go back and forth and visit and play bridge and so forth. And Pat, Larry's wife, got Alzheimer's, and she was just deep into Alzheimer's, and she could not deal with anything. But Larry took care of her. And when Walt died, she was sitting there. She didn't know what was happening. And that's so sad when people get that horrible disease. So Larry was there and helped me with that, and Stephanie did. So after a while, Pat died. And after a few years, Larry and I got married because I knew him so well. After all those years.
I think it's kind of neat that you and Larry split the seasons with Hope, and the local church then down further by Divide or closer to Colorado Springs.
Well, the reason for that is because Larry had belonged to the First Congregational Church in the Springs for years, and I had stayed up here and belonged to this church. We thought, we don't want to lose our acquaintances and friendships, and so we thought, well, what can we do? Well, we decided to buy a house in Monument, which was about halfway between both.
Right.
So we split our time, hard as it is. We come up here for about 5-6 months, and then we go down south in the winter. South, Colorado Springs.
Yes.
So it works out well.
Until we have snowstorms like we did this week, then it's a little more difficult.
I was hoping that wouldn't happen today. Oh, yeah, and so that's why we go south in the winter,
Yep.
big south.
Okay, you've been a member here for 42 years, and we've talked about some of your memories. Do you have a favorite memory of your participation here at Hope?
I really enjoyed the worship committee, and I enjoyed decorating the church at Christmas time. I made all the wreaths that they still hang now. Maybe you didn't know that. I made the ones that hang on the back wall,
Yes.
and the two at the front over around the cross. And I made the Advent candle wreath,
Mhm.
and they still use them. Isn't that great?
I didn't know that.
Right. So and then I split the flower assignments with a couple of other gals, because the people who sign up to bring flowers on Sunday, somebody has to do it. So I love that part. So we'd shop for flowers, and we had a very strict budget, $25. You can't get too much for $25, but
Not anymore, that's
not
right.
anymore. So they raised it to 35. But then you could bring the bouquet and put it on the altar, and then after church, the person who it was designated for could take it home.
Yeah.
I love that part.
I do too.
Yeah, that's very important.
I didn't realize that you made those wreaths that we pull out for
Yeah.
Christmas and
Yeah.
Easter time.
They
That's
just
nice.
need to be fluffed.
Well, what do you like best about this community?
This is where it's kind of like a home, a very friendly home, where you feel comfortable and people care about each other, and they really do care. If you have a problem, they'll help you through it. It's just friendly and comfortable, and even though pastors come and go, and some you like more than others, it doesn't matter. This is still, Hope Church is still our home, or mine. And then I share Larry's when we go down there.
I think that's pretty neat that you have friends and
Yeah.
people in both of those
Yeah,
communities
It
that you.
is. It works out. It was hard, but it works out.
Would you mind sharing some of your thoughts with us about the current split in the United Methodist Church?
I think it's sad. It doesn't seem necessary to me, because I think people should be just left alone. Doesn't matter what you believe or who you believe or where you're going or whatever. It's just, it should not split over something that's to me it's simple. Like whatever your belief is and how you live and who you love should not matter. I think we're all equal. I just don't get it.
Thank you.
I did think of one thing I wanted to tell you. One special thing is the memorial garden. I was on that committee when it started, because I thought that was so important to have a memorial garden. And so we worked on that pretty hard. Bert Goins and Margaret was the pastor then. So, just a sec. We got that going after a lot of talk with Greenwood Village, like, oh, we can't have our children walking past a graveyard. And I'm from New England, and I'm thinking, every single church has a graveyard with stones. They
They've
walk
been there
past
300
it.
years.
How can you protect children from a graveyard? But anyway, it got done, and it's very important, because even if people their ashes aren't buried there, at least there's a plaque, a wall on the back. So Walt's plaque is on the back wall. Mine will be too, and Larry's probably. I think that's such an important thing to have that memorial garden.
Thank you. I agree with that
Mhm.
attitude. And
Yeah.
whether you have someone there or not, it's a
Mhm.
peaceful place just to
yeah.
go and be alone and
Mhm.
maybe say your prayers or
Right.
feel a connection to
They
God.
did a beautiful job with that, I
I
thought.
agree.
Really good.
We've seen a lot of growth in Hope Church. So 1980 was a pretty small church meeting in essentially one building to
Mhm.
branching out and things. What would you like to see Hope do over the next 42 years?
42. I'd like to see the church stay here, and I'd like to see it branch out and do new things to try to incorporate the community or to help bring more people in if they knew we were here. But I think COVID really hit the church hard. So that has to be brought back. And also, um, sports for kids on Sunday is a terrible thing, I think, because so many young parents have to take the kid to soccer or baseball or something, and so they don't go to church. And I just think that's too bad. But it's, excuse me, it's clubs that do the sports. It's not the high schools.
Right?
And so that makes the attendance drop dramatically. And I think people get used to not going to church. But I don't know how they get along without it, because it's so special to have a faith and a rock.
We've talked about some of your good memories and some sad times that you've had at this church and different people. Anybody else come to mind that was an influence on you here at the Hope?
Mm, there's so many people who are important. Um, they're all together.
I like that attitude.
Yeah.
Um, Carol, have we missed anything that you wanted to say or you'd like us to know about your involvement here with Hope?
I don't think so. But it was fun to think back. What can I remember? Good thing you caught me when I still could remember.
Well, Carol, just as we were winding up, you reminded me of another lady who served here, Marla Cowers. Can you tell us your memories of Marla?
Yes, I learned a lot from her. She taught classes, and her sermons were really interesting. And didn't she serve with someone? She, she was with Steve Warren, I think, at that time.
That's right.
And she taught us. We went to a class called Finding Your Gifts. Did you do that one?
I did.
And it was so interesting because we all found out through that teaching what our gifts are. And sometimes you're just not interested in doing that. You're allowed to say, no, thank you. But then you found out, yes, I'm really good organizer. I'm really interested in writing letters. And and so you could find out how you could help other people and if you do it. And I remember one time she was up in the pulpit and she said, "This is my favorite time of the calendar year. It's ordinary time." And I thought, yeah, I like ordinary time. That's what I want to say about her.
I did take that class that you mentioned, and it helped me to say no. And her whole approach was that we all have different talents, and some people are suited to organizing, some people are suited to outreach, some people are suited to being a teacher, and some people are not. And it's okay if those are not your talents to say, no, thank you, I'll serve in another way. I kind of grew up thinking if somebody asks you to do something, you're supposed to say
You're supposed to
yes,
say yes.
even
Yeah.
if it wasn't something you enjoyed or had no talent for. And she gave me the permission to say, that's really not my strength. and to go on and do something
Yeah,
else.
that was great. It was great, like finishing a book you don't like. I grew up thinking
Me too.
I had to finish the book. I thought, well, wait a minute, do I really have to finish this book? It took me till I was
If I
50
don't
to
enjoy
find-
it at all.
to find that out.
Oh,
Dear.
that's
Oh,
true.
thanks, that was good. She was good.
I enjoyed her very much. Thank you very much for sitting for this interview, and thank you for all your service to this church. You've been instrumental in many lives, and we appreciate your talents and your efforts.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.